Thank you so much for inviting me to what promises to be an exciting session. I'm in fact privileged and honored to be here and to speaking to all of you. I was invited to participate about 2 weeks ago and I readily agreed because I wish to get more and more into this field of freedom. Not so much the media specifically, but freedom of expression, right to speak and so on. So I think in this 75th year of our freedom, it is appropriate that we look back and see what we have achieved and even what we have lost. Therefore, rather than talking about the media itself within a democratic framework, I'm going to focus more on the Constitution of India. Constitution, as you know, has completed 75 years, 26th November 1946, it completed 75 years. And we're moving forward. And there are people who will say that the Constitution has been amended more than 100 times now. So what kind of document is this that it's continuously changing? Perhaps the strength of the Constitution lies in that very same fact that we are able to have a document which supports the structure of our country and is amenable to change, to make changes so that we can move forward in a more enlightened and more liberal fashion. So I'm going to take the privilege of sharing the screen with you with a PPT, and I hope you can see it. Let me just bring it up. Can you see this?
Yes, perfectly.
You can, okay. So therefore, the subject of my talk today is more on the Constitution, the specific provisions of the Constitution which guarantee freedom of speech, and what will ultimately possibly be some kind of a framework for the media for the future. Let us briefly look at this very crucial 90 years, 1857 to 1947, 90 years, when the British took over the reins of administration of our country immediately after the First War of Independence. It brought in the Government of India Act in 1858, and then passed a series of legislations. There were 3 Indian Councils Act, there was the Government of India Act in 1935, and finally the 1947 Indian Independence Act, which gave freedom to our country. So in these 90 years of freedom, there was a continuous struggle going on. In fact, I would say that the first 40, 50 years was dull. Not much action was taking place. It is only the beginning of the 20th century. And in fact, with the arrival of Gandhiji from South Africa, the things started moving. He galvanized that freedom movement. Until then, the Indian Congress Party was just a group of elite businessmen or thinkers or philosophers or teachers, but he galvanized it into a freedom movement in which everybody was involved. So the question to ask is, this very liberal concept of freedom to speak, freedom to express yourself, where did it come from? Let us not forget that the 3 greatest stalwarts of our freedom movement, the 3 greatest names of our freedom movement, Gandhiji, Nehru, and Ambedkar, all had their education in England. All were educated outside. And that gave them a weapon to be used against the British itself. Because across Europe, there was something called an enlightenment taking place. People were realizing the value of human rights. People were realizing the value of self-determination, self-rule. And England was one of those prominent countries which talked about this. So the British found themselves in a bind. That here they were talking of freedom on the one hand. On the other hand, they were masters, colonial masters of slave countries. So I think this freedom movement leaders really understood this subtle point with which to strike at the British, and they expanded on it in such a manner that it really went home, it struck home. So we look back at English history, 1688 was the English Bill of Rights. And I'm quoting from the Bill of Rights, the freedom of speech and debate or proceedings in Parliament ought not to be impeached or questioned in any court or place out of Parliament. One of the first expressions of freedom of speech. 1789, French Revolution, the French declared the free communication of ideas and opinions is one of the most precious rights of man. Every citizen may, accordingly, speak, write, and print with freedom, but shall be responsible for such abuses of this freedom as shall be defined by law. One of the first times we get a legal definition of freedom of speech. And we all know the 1948 United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media. Keeping this in mind, let us quickly glance at what the British were doing during this period. They were gagging the press. Immediately out of the First War of Independence in 1857, they brought in the Gagging Act. It is called the Gagging Act to prevent freedom of speech. There was a Vernacular Press Act of 1878, which again forbid the Amrita Bazar Patrika from printing certain kinds of news. The Press Act of 1910, again repeated because the situation of the World War was developing slowly, and they put a lot of curbs on Indian press. We have our own experience of 1975 when emergency was imposed in India. Film censorship continues somewhat in an orthodox fashion. We have the two provisions of IPC 153A and 295 to look at this very same aspect. Even today, do you know that there are 43 books banned in India at a national level and 12 at the state level? Keeping all this in mind, when we have this annual Freedom Index, Press Freedom Index 2021, India was placed in an abysmally low 142nd rank out of 180 countries which were surveyed. In the Indian Constitution, when we talk of Article 19, which is freedom of speech, let us look at where this idea came from. How did it evolve? How did Article 19 espouse the idea of freedom of speech? Began from 1931 in the Karachi Resolution of the Congress Party, when the participants in that meeting resolved that freedom of speech must be a fundamental right. 1931, so many years before independence. The Nehru Report of 1928 also clearly said, the right to free expression of opinion is hereby guaranteed for purposes not opposed to public order or morality. 1928. And then finally, when the Constituent Assembly sat down to prepare the Constitution of India, there was extensive debates on the freedom of speech. And I cannot summarize it here because it runs into pages and pages. After having experienced the censorship that the British had imposed on the Indian people, the Constituent Assembly members were only violently expressing the view that they should all have freedom of speech. Every Indian should be able to express his views and so on. So we must go through some of the debates of the Constituent Assembly to understand the feeling and the passion of the people who were speaking on that occasion. And the preamble to the Constitution, which is just 85 words, and I draw your attention to that third bullet, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. We are focusing on liberty of thought and expression. Embedded into the preamble of our Constitution, and in a way summarizing what we believe in as a nation, as a philosophical content of our nation's Constitution. So what are the specific provisions in the Constitution? Article 19.1a and 19.2. 19.1a clearly says all citizens shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression. But 19.2 goes back a step. It says, no, you all have the right, all right, but the state can restrict this right. If the sovereignty and integrity of the nation is at peril, if the security of the state is at peril, if what you write in your media is affecting our friendly relations with other countries, and if there is a danger of public order, decency, morality, then that right can be restricted. Now, these two, what apparently contradictory articles of the Constitution has to be kept in mind as I take you forward. So there are some challenges which came to the concept of freedom of speech, which came up for discussion in the Supreme Court. And I just run you through 3 or 4 of these cases so that we get an idea of what is happening. Now, this Ramesh Thapad case of 1950 is very, very important. The Constitution had just been created in January 1950. Within 3 months, this crisis arose. A newspaper in Madras called Crossroads published something against the Madras government, something which created a lot of furor and law and order situation in that particular state. So the Madras government put certain binding conditions on the paper, saying that you cannot print these matters, you are causing law and order issues, you cannot circulate this kind of news among the people, and they put a stop to it. This case ultimately and very quickly went up to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said, look, the fundamental right of expression is there and every man has it. And the government cannot take a view that because of public order, you cannot exercise your right. Now, what I'm saying may appear contradictory to what I've just said in the last slide. Let me just go back. I've said in Article 19.2, public order, decency, morality, security of the state, these are reasons where you can restrict the freedom of speech. But in the Ramesh Thapad case, at that point of time, this condition of security of state was not in the Constitution. Condition of order and public order and tranquility was not a restricting clause. And that is why it is a almost shameful thing to say, within 4 or 5 months of the Constitution coming into place, the first constitutional amendment took place. Nehru himself, one of the creators of the Constitution, had to stand up in the Lok Sabha and say, look, I am going to include public order, tranquility, peace as a restricting clause under Article 19.2, because if you give freedom of speech to everybody to say and do anything that they want, then there'll be a lot of chaos in the country. So such a poignant situation for the prime minister of that level and stature to put one more curtailment on the right to speech by imposing this law and order clause, saying that in law and order cases, you cannot express free speech. And that was upheld. It was upheld by the Supreme Court. Now, the second Sakal papers and the Bennett-Coleman case and the Indian Express case, these 3 cases, all pertain to restrictions put on newspapers regarding its size, regarding import of newsprint, regarding the cost to be charged on papers, various technical requirements that were imposed on newspapers. In all 3 cases, the Supreme Court said, no, your orders are violating the right to speech. We have to withdraw those orders. The Import Control Order, the Newsprint Order 1972, the Newspaper Act 1956, they were all withdrawn. They had to be withdrawn by the state government, by the governments concerned, because the Supreme Court said, no, you cannot restrict the right to speech simply by putting conditions on the number of pages, the number of circulation to be given, and the costing of the paper. All these are trivial arguments which cut at the root of the right to speech, and they abolished all those regulations. In the same way, PUCL case of 1996 looked at electoral laws. The electoral laws at that time made it clear that an electoral candidate need not divulge more information than is actually required for the election purposes. PUCL went to court and said, no, it is the right of every citizen to understand what is that particular public representative's income. Are there any police cases against him? Has he been convicted in any case? So PUCL case 1996, which was upheld by the Supreme Court, said, no, all these information about a candidate has to be brought into public domain and people have a right to know it. The Rajagopal case of 1994, a very interesting case in which a prisoner who was to be executed, he wrote his autobiography. And before he was executed, he gave it to his wife for printing. And in that document, there were a lot of criticism and complaint against the jail authorities. The jail authorities got frantic and they tried to put a ban on the publication, saying that he's saying all kinds of stupid things. We don't want this to be published. The Supreme Court said, no, he has the right to express his views. And the widow of that man, after his execution, was allowed to bring and publish this document. We also have the Brijbhushan case, where a condition, this is 1950, the condition was placed by the government in a certain situation that any kind of news should be first brought to the censor of the government before it is printed. Any sensitive news, first you bring it to the government, we will see whether it is correct or wrong or whether it is couched in the right language, and then we will decide. Court said, no, you have no right for pre-censorship. If you have any problem, then you take recourse to the law after it is printed. We have this also famous case of Maneka Gandhi, 1977, I think. The Indira Gandhi had been defeated. The Janata Party had come in. And Maneka Gandhi wanted to go abroad to deliver a speech in some international forum. And her passport was impounded because the Janata government felt that she will go and speak against the Janata Party abroad. Again, the court turned it down, saying that she has the right to go abroad. And she has the right to make a speech even in foreign shores. She can make the speech. So the government had to withdraw and change its orders. And finally, one more example. This is a not so important Rangarajan 1989 case, where a U certificate was given to a particular film. But the government felt that that particular Tamil movie, it may create a law and order situation because it dealt with caste issue. And therefore, they wanted to convert it into A. But no, again, the government said no. The Supreme Court said no. What has been given is correct. Anybody can see it. It is their right to know what is happening in the caste situation, and they permitted it. So just one quick slide on emergency. Emergency was declared under Article 352 of the Constitution. Media came under it. The declaration of emergency meant the suspension of civil liberties, and censoring of press was very, very required. In fact, every government wanted every newspaper to be censored. And the government took recourse to Article 19.2, as you see, you remember I told you, security of the state. Security of the state had to be maintained, so they took recourse to Article 19. And I'll just make a comment here that the media virtually succumbed to this. Very few persons stood up and opposed it. And L.K. Advani's famous comment to the press was, when you were asked to bend, you crawled. That's a severe indictment of the press. Well, we must now, therefore, also look at the current situation. There is a time today when people are saying that the Constitution is in threat, is dangerous to the Constitution. Our own government's directions to Twitter and Facebook, UP government's threat to use the National Security Act for people who are speaking against the government regarding COVID, the IT Act of 2000, where Section 66A about comments made in Facebook and other social media were severely imposed by the government, was struck down by the court. You know of several cases where action has been taken against news reporters, even stand-up comedians. They cannot, say what they want to say in the audience. The data protection bill, which is just coming up, where certain government bodies have been exempted from any kind of restriction. And of course, I must mention in the context of media, the large number of sedition cases against newspapers and writers on the sedition law. And I'm so thankful to the Supreme Court that they have decided to review all sedition cases and bring about a new definition of what sedition should actually mean. In this context, what should be the media's role? How should the media behave? How should it come forward and express its views? The Press Council of India has given certain norms. They have said it should be accurate. You must verify what you're going to print. Don't print any defamatory things. Keep in mind the Official Secrets Act. Don't just give opinions and conjecture and suggest a person is guilty. You must be very cautious about court proceedings, because court proceedings are sacrosanct. The right of reply to the person who is accused should be given to him. You should always ask the person concerned whether you agree with what is going to be written or not. Avoid obscenity, condemn violence, look at paramount national interest and foreign relations, don't resort to plagiarism, and avoid references to caste, religion, and so on. Very, very broad guidelines given by the Press Council to ensure that the media expresses its views, but also within certain conditions imposed on itself. There's also certain international guidelines which have been given, known as the MADRID principles. In MADRID, a large group of media and judges and the government had sat down together and looked at what could be the right way for a media to express its views. Now, having said all this, I would like to conclude by thinking about what the role of the media should be in our present situation. We cannot forget this fact that the freedom of speech is a priceless gift. Priceless gift. We cannot overemphasize it. It is so very important to our country, especially in such a diverse country like ours. But truth must be told. Opinions are not truth. Therefore, any media which is bringing out any news must do a very rigorous research on facts and statistics. Some newspapers also say that get it confirmed. You are going to express something, going to bring forward a certain news, but get it confirmed by one or two independent and reliable sources. See to it that there is no ideological tilt, left, right, center. Bring out facts. Don't bring any tilt in ideology. Your article should be balanced, bringing all views to bear when your article is brought out. Keep in mind what the courts say. I've given you examples of about 8 or 10 cases where the Supreme Court has pronounced certain manner in which the media should behave. Credibility is earned, not given. And you will find there are certain newspapers, even today in our country, we generally say, okay, it is such and such newspaper. So I think they must have done their study well and brought out the right facts. There are certain other newspapers which you dismiss straight away because they indulge in all kinds of things. So ultimately, I feel that in a democratic, constitution-based country like ourselves, control of the media is not so important as self-regulation by the media. The media should themselves sit down and see what is right and what is wrong, what is the truth and what is post-truth or fake news. They should themselves put curbs on their own action, but never sacrificing the principle of the freedom of speech. So overall, I thought this was what I should say to you, speaking on this occasion, within the democratic framework of our country, and particularly keeping the Constitution of India, which is the foundation of our economic polity, social polity, keeping that in mind, what should be the lessons that the media should draw? This is what I tried to bring to you today, to speak to you today. I have nothing more to say. I would be very happy to listen to the other speakers and get involved. I think even your future programs I would like to attend because this seems to be quite interesting the way you're bringing it forward. Thank you.